Yeah, that's better, right? Okay, good. So, happy to see so many faces here today. So many students. Great of you to come. I hope you enjoy this session. I'm sure I will. We have the pleasure of having Nick Groom here, Dr. Nick Groom from the University of Exeter, internationally renowned specialist on Gothic literature, on Chatterton, on issues of English identity, culture, and so on and so forth. Nick has taught at the universities of Oxford, Bristol, Stanford, and Chicago, apart from Exeter, obviously, where he is based. And he's currently a professor in English at this University of Exeter and co-director of the Exeter Center for Literatures of Identity, Place, and Sustainability, meaning that he is also engaging in issues of ecological culture and especially related to literature. Now, he has written widely in both the academic and popular press. Among his books are two studies of national identity, the Union Jack that he published in 2006 about the flag and the implications of that flag for national identity, and The Seasons. This is a book that you can find also out here in the stand on the table. In 2013, and this book was shortlisted for the Catherine Briggs Folklore Award and a runner-up for Countryfile Book of the Year, as well as a short introduction also to the Gothic in this series from the Oxford University Press. Very, very succinct, very, very well summarized, and I think it's an essential reading for anyone even remotely interested in the Gothic, not only in literature but also in history and in culture. Last year, Oxford University Press published its anniversary edition of the Gothic novel The Castle of Otranto. And he has another two editions in press also for Oxford, The Monk by Matthew Gregory Lewis and The Italian by Anne Radcliffe, that will be published this year, next year? 2016. Nick has been interested in Tolkien since before he was an undergraduate. And his first publication was in the newsletter of the Tolkien Society when he was aged 14 years old. So he's been around a while in Tolkien studies. He now teaches the only undergraduate course, the module on Tolkien in the UK at Exeter, right? Yeah. And he had an essay in Stuart Lee's Blackwell Companion to Tolkien that was published last year, among many other things that he continuously publishes on many different issues. So, it's a pleasure for me to introduce Nick Groom here today. He will be giving his talk on the Gothic, the nation, and the Inklings. So, whenever you're ready, Nick, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. I'm delighted to be here. It's my first time in the Basque Country, and I'm very pleased to be at this inaugural conference organised by Martin, Raoul, and the team here. So thank you. Now, this paper develops my thinking about Tolkien and his relationship with English literature. I'm attempting to unravel further Tolkien's relationship with his use of Gothic motifs of national identity. And my own particular account of the Gothic is historicist. By which I mean I'm looking at the cultural and political understandings of the term, rather than taking, say, a psychoanalytic or semiological approach. I'm arguing that the Gothic is a characteristically English style of literature, architecture, art, and folklore that emerges from politicised cultural identities or cultural memories, that it's a distinctive imaginative response to history, which is developed in which antiquity is being perceived as haunted and ruinous, remote from modern society, and yet responsible for and indeed potentially present everywhere in modern society. So the Gothic imagination is consequently a reminder of historical progress and also at the same time a lament for the lost past. It's a guarded suppression of the violence of history that's nevertheless led to the present day. And I'll be talking about this in more detail in the next few minutes. One of the reasons that I'm particularly pleased to be here is to learn more about Spanish cultural attitudes to the Visigothic, the Visigothos kingdoms, and how that cultural inheritance might have influenced Spanish identity. So I'm therefore seeking to go deeper than simply talking about the macabre, the mysterious, the monstrous, the magical. What I'm trying to argue is that, at least in England, the Gothic was, and still is, a way of coming to terms with the processes of English and subsequently British and Irish history, which is why in the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries it had strong political, social and theological significance. So it's from this perspective that I'll be approaching Tolkien's work, and I'm afraid I haven't got time to talk about C.S. Lewis as well, but maybe we can do that during the round table tomorrow. So I'll begin with a concise account of the history of the Gothic before suggesting some specific examples from Tolkien. So I'm arguing that placing Tolkien within this English Gothic tradition can cast new light on his work and the ways in which he uses history. Now, most people in at least the English-speaking world, you may disagree, would associate the Gothic with 18th and 19th century terror fiction, and the Goths themselves with a thriving subculture and musical style that's been around since about the 1980s. Now, this isn't me. When I showed it to my wife, she says, "Is that you?" No, it's not me, but it is at Whitby Goth Festival a year or two ago. I have been to the festival, but that's not me. Now, if asked further, some people would say, well, the Gothic's also a form of medieval architecture. And the Goths, Visigoths, and Ostrogoths were ancient barbarian races who overran the Roman Empire, who might be associated with Attila the Hun and the discoveries at Sutton Hoo, which is the great ship burial excavated in England in the 1930s, exactly contemporary with Tolkien's work on The Hobbit. Now, all of these answers I've just given are broadly correct, but I want to concentrate on the middle part of that history, the 18th and 19th century connotations of Gothic and the Goths. The meaning of Gothic was highly perplexed, it was complicated in the 18th century, but strong threads, three strong threads are discernible. First, the Goths were defined as a Teutonic, as a Germanic tribe of the declining years of the Roman Empire, the period of late antiquity. Secondly, Gothic referred to a political theory derived from anti-classical values attributed to these barbarians. And thirdly, the term referred to the literature and especially the architecture of the Middle Ages and its revival in the cult of medievalism. So the Teutonic tribal Goths crossed the river Danube in AD 376 and by AD 410 had sacked Rome. So in the 5th century had sacked Rome. In the next century, the historian Jordanes, himself a Goth, provided his people with a rich theory of racial origins, far north of the Mediterranean. He described their migrations to a place called Scythia, which is in Eastern Europe on the edge of the Black Sea, and their current subsequent victory over the Romans. Now, historians and chroniclers then subsequently used the term Goth as a general term to cover the Germanic tribes, including the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes. Jutes, it was thought, was a corruption of the word Goth. So these are the Germanic tribes who then colonize, migrate to other parts of Europe. So in this version of ancient history, the Goths were imagined to be part of the genesis, part of the creation of the English nation. They'd landed there in AD 449, halfway through the 5th century, under the lords Hengist and Horsa, the horse lords. And this is how the word Gothic began to develop its later political implications. Now, these ancient Goths and their language pervade Tolkien's writing. He acquired Joseph Wright's primer of the Gothic language in 1908 and 1909, and by the 11th of March 1910 was speaking in Gothic at a debate at his school. The debates were conducted in Latin, but he was playing the part of a Goth and spoke in Gothic. His first invented language was a supplement to Gothic, Gothic as he called it, which was supposedly spoken by the Geats of Beowulf, after which he wrote a Gothic poem, a poem in the language of Gothic, to suggest what literature had been lost by the Gothic inheritance not surviving. And while an undergraduate, Tolkien attended Joseph Wright's lectures on Gothic grammar before lecturing on it himself. And he admitted, "Gothic was the first to take me by storm, to move my heart. It was the first of the old Germanic languages that I ever met. I've since mourned the loss of Gothic literature. I did not then. The contemplation of the vocabulary in a primer of the Gothic language was enough. A sensation at least as full of delight as first looking into Chapman's Homer, though I did not write a sonnet about it. I tried to invent Gothic words." Now, as you may recognise, the allusion there on first looking into Chapman's Homer is the romantic poet John Keats's sonnet with that title. And while Tolkien admits that he did not write a sonnet about Gothic, ultimately he endeavoured to recreate the entire culture. So early in his career, in a translation of Beowulf, which was published finally last year, which he made while at the University of Leeds, Tolkien equated the Geat people of Beowulf with the Goths and lectured on the legends of the Goths. They became woven into his mythology. Many commentators have pointed out that the people of Rohan have Gothic names, in particular the Rohirrim chieftains before the Aeol dynasty have Gothic names. And there was a tradition that Gothic meant horse folk. So the Rohirrim are not simply reinvented Anglo-Saxons, as we might commonly take them to be, but Goths. But indeed, Sandra Bailiff-Strobhauer has argued that the marriage of Faramir to Éowyn at the end of The Lord of the Rings is reminiscent of the dynastic marriages between Romans and Goths in late antiquity. They're coming from different cultures, different peoples. And Appendix F of The Lord of the Rings also offers Gothic names for hobbits, such as Calimac Brandagamba for Meriadoc Brandybuck. Tom Shippey has pointed out that the Battle of the Pelennor Fields is based on the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, fought in AD 451 between the Romans and the Visigoths against the Huns, supported by the Ostrogoths. Names in Tolkien's work, The Lost Road, are also taken from the Gothic, and the associated poem King Sheev is a Gothic myth. Most explicitly, the legend of Sigurd and Guthrun, Tolkien's version of which was published 2 or 3 years ago, assimilates the Gothic narrative poem in Heidrek Saga as the battle of the Goths and Huns. Moreover, in an unpublished lecture on the Goths, Tolkien wrote, "In vain we regret the past or speculate on what might have been, yet it is inevitable that we should regret. In dealing with the Goths, regret cannot be avoided. If not regret for what might have been, at any rate, regret for our altogether scanty records of what was, the vanishing of their tradition, literature, history, and most of their tongue." So rather than seeing the Goths as the barbarians who had brought about the collapse of the Roman Empire, Tolkien argued that the Romans had brought about the ruin of Gaul and the submergence of its native language or languages, arts and traditions, dooming to obscurity the debate and history of perhaps the most remarkable